Chapter 19. Saintly Blessings Can Work Wonders. Jayaben was married to Champakbhai Oza at a very young age. She was sad on account of her chronic illness. In those days, when a rupee had 50 times the purchasing power compared to the present day, they were obliged to spend about 300 rupees per month on her treatment and had to manage their expenses from what remained as the balance. Around 1946, despite spending huge sums on medical care for years, Jayaben got pleurisy and the left lung became completely non-functional. She had cold, cough, high fever and was confined to the bed on doctor's orders. During those days, Gurudev was in Rajkot and Jayaben's husband Champakbhai came regularly to listen to his discourses. He always sat at the end of the gathering devotees and would listen faithfully. One day, due to worries about his wife's health, his attention was constantly wandering, and during the discourse he kept on glancing at his watch, because the doctor was to come at 4 p.m. for Jayaben's checkup. His sense of direction told him that it would be disrespectful to leave before end of the discourse. Suddenly, Gurudev looked in his direction and said, "Those whose minds are elsewhere may leave." Champakbhai was surprised by this knowledge of Gurudev about his mental state, but taking advantage of the permission, he left quietly. At this, people all around him started mumbling. What sort of an emergency could make a person leave in the midst of a pravachan? Champakbhai's friend, who was present in the gathering, explained his dire predicament and about Jayaben's health. Gurudev said with a smile, "I know everything, and there is nothing wrong with her." These prophetic words proved to be a boon. When Champakbhai reached home in a hurry, the puzzled doctor was moving his stethoscope over Jayaben's chest from one spot to another. He said, "She is not ill, and I give her permission to move around the house." Later, when he re-examined her after 4 days, the astonished doctor said, "Either my thermometer is defective or the medical science is wrong, but despite registering high fever, she is able to move around without any discomfort." Gurudev's benevolent words, "There is nothing wrong with her," did their work. Later, Jayaben could walk to the doctor's clinic and he found her free from all diseases. Now, after 25 years, at the time of publication of the first Gujarati edition, she is hale and hearty, and there are no restrictions or medications in her life. This is how simple and benign blessings of saints work their wonders. Jai Bhagwan. Chapter 20. Shri Ram Maha Yajna. After 6 months of founding of the Sadguru Sadan in 1946, Pujara Bhai approached Gurudev for getting his consent for performing a Maha Yajna in Rajkot. Gurudev gave the consent, but added, "It is an excellent idea, but while feeding the ahutis in the yajna, simultaneously we must also feed the hungry humanity." All agreed to this noble task, and in preparation, provisions began to arrive. Saints from all over India were invited, and Shri Bhagwadacharya, a saint of Ramanuja sect, had agreed to be present at the inaugural ceremony. Some interested parties had spread a false rumor that, ignoring local pandits, Gurudev had invited pandits from Uttarakhand and Kashi. Believing this to be true, Prabhu Ramdasji, a learned Shastri of Rajkot, left town and went to Bombay to escape such an insult to local talent. When Gurudev returned to Rajkot and was informed about this development, he reverentially invited all the learned Brahmins and on hearing about Prabhu Ramji, he sent a telegram to his Bombay address, re-inviting him and requesting him to be the chief priest at the yagna ceremony. Prabhu Ramji responded magnanimously and returned and worked wholeheartedly for the success of the Maha. After all, the yagna was in interest of the general public and for redistribution of boons and benefits among all. Next day, when devotees were heaping garlands on him, Gurudev said, "Why do you waste money on these garlands? Even one flower is enough." He continued, "You do not seem to be listening to my teachings. Use the savings from the garlands to feed the hungry. Early involvements by gifting shawls, clothes, and cars." He illustrated his point by giving example of a student who was physically present in the class while the teacher teaches, but since he has not listened carefully, he fails in the exam. He requested them not to be like the inattentive student. About honors and insults being merely a state of mind, he narrated his own experience. To avoid crowds at the station, once he had come to Rajkot without any prior information, and it being 2 a.m. at night, instead of waking up the chokidar, he entered the ashram from the back. On waking up, the chokidar, who had never met him, ordered him out. Knowing that it was the chokidar's ignorance that was speaking through him, he quietly went and slept under a tree. The confused chokidar searched for Gurudev's photo and, recognizing his face, brought him in with greatest reverence and asked for his forgiveness. Gurudev said, "If we think about the frame of mind of the opposite party, we can avoid the anger due to insults and false pride on being praised by others." As the appointed day grew closer, saints and the learned from all over started converging on Rajkot. The essence of learning came from the Kashi, the saint Samaj of Ayodhya, and Mahatmas of Chitrakoot arrived. All were welcomed with due reverence and accommodated, if need be, in comfortable tents and rautis. Each sect differed from others in mode of worship and tilak marks. Some were showy, while others were simple. With his untiring zeal and humility, Pujya Shri visited each tent and shone like the glorious moon among this constellation of saints, the most illustrious of them all. There were separate arrangements for each varna. So far, Rajkot had seen only his saintly qualities. Now his organizational skills came to the fore. An exclusive Sant Sabha was called prior to the yagna. Addressing this august assembly, Gurudev said, "Our words would carry more weight in our preachings to the common man if our conduct matched our teachings." The Brahmins of Kashi, who were specially invited for the yagna, raised a scriptural objection. They contended that according to their knowledge, there was no scriptural support for Brahman nature of Ram, who despite his greatness was only a prince of Ayodhya, and therefore a yagna cannot be performed in his name. Pujya Shri, having anticipated such controversy, had got prepared by Bhagwadacharya of Ahmedabad a learned thesis, which gave him scriptural proof about Brahman nature of Shri Ram. It also laid down the yagna ritual. When the Kashi delegation read the scholarly thesis, their criticism and opposition vanished. Thus at last the yagna started. It was formally inaugurated by the former ruler of Rajkot, Shri Pradyumna Sinhaji, and Shri Bhagwadacharya of Ahmedabad. It was conventional to start the yagna by producing fire by rubbing 2 pieces of wood. While all other pundits failed to do so, Gurudev produced the ceremonial frictional fire at the first attempt. 27 days were earmarked for the yagna, and daily or by bullock cart. Other religious programs organized during these days were: 1. Ranchoddasji gave discourses on Gita for the first 2 days. 2. Then for the next 9 days, Awadh Kishorji gave discourses on Ramayana. 3. The next 7 days were devoted to the Bhagavad Saptah. 4. For the last 4 days, Madhav Lalbhai explained the essence of the Ramcharitmanas. The yagna was performed in the open between 8 to 12 noon and 3 to 6 afternoon. People who came for the yagna-darshan derived benefit by listening to the discourses as mentioned earlier, and between 6 to 8 p.m. there would be bhajans by well-known devout singers. The scriptures decreed that yagna fire must be kept burning round the clock, and a strict vigil was kept to ensure this. Gurudev supervised everything with his boundless energy, without rest or respite. Since the scriptures forbade the use of babul wood in yagna, he instructed the havaniks accordingly. As instructed by Pujya Shri, the kitchens were kept open round the clock to serve food to the saints, the learned, as well as the poor and the needy, without any distinction of caste, class, or reed. As rationing was then still in force, the rationing department objected to the unauthorized use of food. Gurudev wrote to Gandhiji, who at once issued strict instructions of non-interference in such a benign project of social welfare. As for himself, Gurudev would only take simple khichdi and his usual wheat tikkad. During that time, once when Gurudev sat surrounded by devotees, an unknown sadhu came and started abusing Gurudev. He suffered in silence, and after the sadhu's angry tirade was over, he asked him lovingly, "Brother, did you have some food?" When he replied, "No," Gurudev told the devotees to procure the necessary meal for him. This was his way of disarming false animosity. Once, during scholarly discussions among the learned, one saint sought and obtained his permission to refute arguments set forth by another speaker. Everyone felt that now there would be conflagration of tempers, but surprisingly, the occasion never arose. On the appointed day, the contender Mahatma remained absent on account of a splitting headache, and the controversy subsided. On the conclusion of the yagna, the completion ceremony was duly celebrated, and all the invitees were given appropriate gifts, that is, dakshina, with a warm send-off. All the participants and devotees were overawed by Gurudev's organizational skills, saintly temperament, scholarly disposition, and his ability to reconcile the conflicting viewpoints at one spot without causing a conflagration of tempers. Donations for the yagna were received in such generous measures that even after meeting all the expenses of the yagna, lakhs of rupees were found to be in surplus. Pujya Shri thought it fit to distribute the same among the poor and needy, but modest middle classes, who were shy in divulging their true condition and needs openly before outsiders and in public. A volunteer corps was told to move from house to house and collect data about the true needs of each family. On finalization of this list, these self-respecting middle-class families were given pro rata amounts from the surplus fund. The money earmarked for each family was tucked in an envelope and slipped across their threshold anonymously after dark to avoid for them the public humiliation of living on charity. Pujya Shri admonished the rich who set aside their pride of positions and act as trustees of public funds, appointed by God, who wished for them to manage the wealth and distribute the same among the poor and needy. On completion of the formalities and disposition of surplus funds as described above, on account of his ceaseless toil and round-the-clock vigil of a month, Gurudev found his eyes heavily lidded with overdue sleep. The Yagna project demonstrated Gurudev's total control over sense organs and brought to the fore his unusual skills of organization and management. Truly, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not be faint. Jai Bhagwan. Chapter 21. The Saint Withdraws for Sadhana. On completion of the yajna, Gurudev retired to a deep forest for rest, recuperation, solitude and sadhana. Without informing anybody about his whereabouts, he took along with him the 16-year-old son of Avantibai, named Ramesh. The boy could not receive proper education due to his indifferent health. While they were in the forest, Gurudev would be sitting in one posture of samadhi for very long periods. Occasionally, he would open his eyes and throw water on the ground from his kamandalu, and flames would leap out. On seeing such a strange sight, the simple soul Ramesh asked Gurudev what it was all about. He was told to mind his own business and not to gaze in Gurudev's direction during his sadhana. Occasionally, when he had spare time, Gurudev tried to teach the boy Sanskrit, simple arithmetic, and even a little English. The simple Ramesh could comprehend MAN, which means man, and CAT, which means cat. But when it came to WHAT, which means what, he was in utter confusion. Gurudev lovingly asked him once, "If your parents were to call you back, would you return or stay here with me?" Ramesh replied promptly, "Of course, I will stay here with you." Pujya Shri taught him cooking, driving, and even how to conduct himself in case he was chosen as a sarpanch, the village head. Jai Bhagwan. Chapter 22. The Benevolent Protection of Saints. The devotees were anxious due to the lack of total news about his whereabouts, and a delegation of Pragji Bhai and his 6 brothers set forth in search of Gurudev. They first went to Chitrakoot, hoping that he would attend the Bhandara over there, following the demise of Shri Ranchoddasji. They were disappointed when Pujya Shri did not come and started for Anantapur. On the journey there, they lost their way in a dense forest, and during the night the situation worsened when heavy rains began. Amidst darkness, thunderclap, and lightning, they were drenched to the skin. Shivering with cold, they managed to reach a village, and the Mukhya, headman, welcomed them and offered hot milk and prepared a fire to warm their frozen bodies. When they asked for tea, the simple Mukhya could not understand what they wanted. Those were the pre-television commercial days, when tea had yet to reach the simple villagers. The Mukhya informed them that it was impossible for them to reach Anantapur, since the roads had become muddy due to rains. As a last resort, they surrendered themselves mentally unto Gurudev for salvation. As if in answer to their prayers, Ramesh came on the scene and said, "Come along, Gurudev is calling you. He is on the outskirts of this village." They embraced Ramesh with joyous ecstasy and went over to Pujya Shri, and they found him in wet clothes, sitting with a serene face near a well. He asked them, "Why are you following me? If I go to the Himalayas, will you still pursue me?" After changing into dry clothes, Gurudev returned to the village with them. In the village he prepared khichdi for all and told them to eat the same, since he knew that they were hungry. They informed him about the sad plight of Rajkot and said, "Bapu, so far there has been no rain." Bapu replied, "Don't worry," and it did. From that village they went to Sironj, and for 4 days Gurudev regaled them with his company. The brothers from Rajkot requested that they may be formally initiated as his disciples, when Gurudev said, "I have stopped taking disciples." But they were still insistent, and he said, "I will initiate those who've bathed 35 times in the river." Accepted his condition, and despite the biting cold, They took 8 baths and would have continued further, but Gurudev stopped them. And on the pretext of bath, after washing away their sins of past several births, he formally initiated them. Lacking funds for their return journey, they were thinking of selling their gold buttons. Gurudev stopped them from doing so and told them that Vrindavanji, the brother-in-law of Ramesh, would loan them the money and they may return to Rajkot. With tears of gratitude in their eyes, the devotees embarked on their return journey, and Pujya Shri, having completed his upasana, returned to Chitrakoot. Jai Bhagwan. Chapter 23. Acts of saints are beyond reason or science. When Gurudev reached Paparenda, he fell prey to severe dysentery. As dehydration took its toll for 10 days, the frail body grew weaker and weaker and had to be supported to the toilet several times a day. We may think, how can such an Ansh Avatari, having transcended laws of nature, fall prey to illness common among mortals? One of the reasons could be that having taken on the human form, the Mahatma too must obey Kal Dharma with all of its consequences. Secondly, having saved several devotees from the last stages of death, he had to pay the price by suffering some of those illnesses himself. The third reason could be that he himself might invite such illnesses to check up whether he had truly won over the body's consciousness. In Chitrakoot, because both Moniji and Siyaramdasji were not well, the Bhandara after the sad demise of Ranchoddasji could not be organized. When he learnt about this, Gurudev shook off his illness and got up to go to Chitrakoot. Devotees now understood that the illness was self-inflicted, and as the occasion so demanded, he had cast it off. Once again, while at Chitrakoot, the same disease returned with debility and dehydration, consequent upon 40 motions a day. Doctors from among devotees came from Rajkot. One doctor who found his pulse growing weaker and weaker broke down. He said to the doctor, "Brother, why do you worry? This mortal body is perishable. When Sri Ram and Sri Krishna could not live forever, who am I? But believe me, a yogi can himself determine the time and place of his death." After thus consoling all and having lightened the heavy atmosphere, Gurudev left Chitrakoot, as if for nowhere, in that same condition. Nothing was heard about him for 6 months, after which he returned as though nothing had ever happened. After some time, Gurudev went to Hastam and was in time to attend the ceremony of Ram Yagna. As the ceremonial coconut was sacrificed in the Yagna fire, with ghee, wild and uncontrollable flames scorching things around rose from the kund. Screaming with panic, people started running helter-skelter. The flames were of such height that the mango tree outside caught fire, and the wails of "Fire, fire" were heard from all around. Immediately, Gurudev made a yogic sign for the roaring fire to subside, and it did. As devotee asked him, "How did the fire subside?" he replied with a smile, "It is a simple matter. If one is firm in his resolve, nothing is impossible." Jai Bhagwan. Chapter 24. Experiments with Medication. Sant Gurudev Prakashanandji, popularly known as Godadiya Swami, and Gurudev embraced each other in the Rajkot Dharamshala. After a little chit-chat, Godadiya Swami seriously asked Gurudev, "Now you will have to give me 2 promises." Pujya Shri replied with a smile, "There is nothing which I cannot give you." Godadiya Swami asked first, "Promise me that along with your usual diet of dry roti, you will have some vegetables also." He added, This body machine needs to be oiled for proper functions. Gurudev agreed and asked, "What is your second wish?" "That you should go to Bombay and consult Dr. Balika," said Godaryaji. Gurudev agreed. Swamiji called one of his devotees, Nenshi Bhai, to arrange for Gurudev's stay and check-up in Bombay. The devotees insisted that he should travel by plane. At the Bombay airport, he was received by Harshad Bhai and Dr. Chabil Bhai. At the time, Chabil Bhai was an atheist, but on meeting Gurudev, when he called him by his first name without any introduction, the newborn faith made him bow down with reverence. Next day, Dr. Baliga carried out a thorough checkup and asked Gurudev his age. Gurudev replied with, "A sadhu should not be asked that question." But when Dr. Baliga insisted that he needed it for the diagnostic purpose, Gurudev told him to write down any age that the doctor thought him to be. The doctor asked with humility, "Maharaj Shri, will you take medicines and undergo an operation?" When Gurudev objected, he said, "There is a big tumor in your liver and it must be removed by surgery." He told the devotees who were with Gurudev that the tumor could be cancerous and that the patient may not live for more than a week. The devotees were shaken by this fearful diagnosis, but Gurudev remained calm as though nothing had happened. He politely declined all medical treatment and wished to leave Bombay on his return journey by train. After this incident, for several months there were no news about him. During this period he took only raw papaya to dissolve the tumor by dietary control alone. Once, during a train journey, he fainted due to excessive pain. Seeing his sadhu dress, the fellow travellers got him admitted to Bhopal hospital. The doctors over there had to stitch up his stomach, which had become loose due to recession of the tumor. When he regained consciousness, he jumped from the ground floor window of his ward and disappeared. To the astonishment of all concerned, when he appeared in Bombay after some time, he was perfectly healthy with no sign of illness whatsoever, let alone the deadly cancer. Truly, if God wishes to preserve a person, none can harm him, be it an enemy or disease. Jai Shri Ram.
Sarve Sukhina Santu, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukham Apnuyat.